This is the representation of the kind of quality of speakers that we have here at West Hawai'i Forum. And we put these monthly forums on to provide as much civic involvement and education on issues that are important to you, the community. We are one island. We are one community. But before we get into tonight's forum, I'd like just to take a few minutes to provide you with a quick update on a few items that I think you'd be interested in. We had a July forum with Department of Water Supply, and there you have case in point, an emergency. Water, basically wells, failing left and right starting in January, and it's been an ongoing story. I just talked with Sherry before the show here, Sherry Bracken, and she had indicated that there's a news release today, another well has failed in Ocean View. So the saga continues, but I wanted just to tell you what I got out of Keith Okamoto, who is the Director of Water Supply here in Big Island, and this was an interview I had with Keith, a brief one, Q&A, yesterday. So this is how rapidly things are changing. Yesterday, Keith told me that the water levels in the tanks, and this is reference to North Kona, area that's been most affected by the initially 5 wells that failed. The water levels in the current tanks are stable and are being monitored daily. That's good. He went on to say that they may be able to downgrade to a 10% conservation restriction coming back when the next well comes back online on December 20th. Now, I don't know about the Ocean View well and how that will impact any of the current 4 wells out of the 13 that are down affecting the Kona area, if at all. But that's what Keith told me. Jay from Helco, our friendly utility that provides us power that we take for granted. Jay?
Thank you, Bill. I'm Jay Ignacio. I'm the president of Hawaii Electric Light Company. And I was given 10 minutes to kind of explain what our system is like and how we respond in emergencies. 10 minutes is obviously not enough, but there's going to be time for questions and answers, so I'll try and cover some of your questions and answers later. So just an overview, this is a map of the Big Island. Big Island is 4,000 square miles. We have approximately 85,000 customers on our island. In terms of usage, maximum usage, we have about 185 megawatts of power. This map shows locations of the sources of power. We have what we call firm generation, where it's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have about 270 megawatts. So it's 270 megawatts versus the 185 daily maximum usage. So there is a margin. I kind of couch it as a comfortable margin. I wouldn't say it's a guaranteed margin that will always be enough, but it's kind of a comfortable operating margin, the 270 versus the 185. Then we have other resources, what we call as available. We have wind resources, we have hydroelectric resources, and we have photovoltaic. And that actually supplements or adds on to the firm power generation. Departments like our transmission and distribution department that constructs and maintains the power lines, and we have a customer service department that interfaces with customers, reads the meters. That's our normal structure. We have about 370 employees on island. But when we get into an incident, and today I think the focus will be on hurricanes or large storms. When we get into an incident, we then morph our organization from the normal organization, and we move toward organizing in this National Incident Management System. And this National Incident Management System is a common way that organizations set themselves up so that you can actually build your organization larger as you need more resources. So we've spent a lot of time actually training our personnel in this system and operating it in emergencies. And this is a very flexible system. So what happens typically when a storm is approaching, we activate the leadership of this organization. And as it gets closer, we may start with maybe 20 employees tracking the storm. As it gets closer, we're going to bring in more people. We may bring in, a third of our workforce saying, you abandon your normal duties, let's move into emergency duties. And there, we're checking everything, going through our checklist, making sure we top off all the fuel, making sure the power plants are ready, making sure, the easy problems, clear this tree that's close to the line, getting prepared for the storm impact. And when we go through the storm, and like the last large one that we had, Hurricane Isel, we then actually morph 100% of our workforce goes into emergency mode. So things like meter reading and other duties, we will suspend while we're responding to an incident. So this is kind of an org chart, our NIMS ICS org chart that we morph into when we get into emergency situations. This is some pictures from the last storm. The last storm affected mainly the east, the northeast and southeast portions of the islands. Here in West Hawaii, you didn't really have the impact. So while we were responding on the east side and taking, most of our resources to respond to the east side, the west side kind of was unaffected, and they really even noticed. They didn't even have many power interruptions, although we did have many transmission lines and distribution lines impacted. Isel took us about 2.5 weeks to respond, to get all of our customers back in. One thing to note, if you look at the pictures, is most of the damage was related to trees and branches. I think maybe one pole was affected from the winds and got damaged because of the winds, but not having a tree involved. All of the other damage was related to these trees falling across the line. So a big part of being prepared is to address these trees, and we still have a long way to go in addressing this particular tree, the albizia trees. You've probably seen that in the news. We spend a lot of money addressing these trees. We partner with the state to try and address these trees. These trees are actually designated as an invasive species, so we work with the Invasive Species Council to try and eradicate as much as possible these trees that are impacting our lines. Traditional grid, central station power plant. We use the transmission to interconnect all the large sources of power. We then lower the voltage, run distribution lines through the neighborhoods. When it gets closer to the neighborhood, we lower the voltage again to levels that customers can use. That's the typical traditional. More recently, we actually have distributed generation, where generation is out on the end of the line. Many customers and businesses are actually generating their own power, predominantly photovoltaic. So the typical restoration sequence is when we have a large impact, we have a large storm. Many customers think our focus is getting the power back. But if you have a large storm, and many people in the community are impacted, our focus is not so much in restoring the power. The first step is the well-being of the public. Mr. Magno will talk about Hawaii County Civil Defense, but what we do is we partner with the Hawaii County Civil Defense and all of the other agencies and all of the nonprofits. Before the storm approaches, we're working with the Civil Defense already. And what we do is we work with Hawaii County Civil Defense, or more like they work with us, to determine what are the priorities. So we focus our resources on maybe opening roadways, taking care of emergencies, and not so much on power restoration. Once that phase of the response is done, then we move on to maybe the large sources of the transmission. So some of our customers may be without power and they think we're not doing anything because they don't see our trucks on the road, but we're taking care of the large infrastructure. Then we move on to closer to the customer, repair the distribution, and finally all of the small interconnections to customers. It's basically the sequence that we go through. And that's a real high-level overview. I know you have way more questions, but what we'll do is we'll let the panels give their presentations, and then we'll open up for questions. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm Talmadge Magno, and I'm the administrator for Hawaii County Civil Defense. I just wanted to go over, four different slides real quickly. Our mission related to sustainability basically starts with resiliency in the community. So what we've been preaching basically is individual, family, community preparedness. And you'll see throughout the slides, I'll kind of, talk about how that relates to everything that we're dealing with. But, I'll go over our mission, the different natural hazards, which I'm sure you guys are aware of, coordination that we do for communications and education, and then coordination between the different government, public, and private partners. So the first part of our mission is to prepare for response to emergencies and disasters. Part of that planning, developing plans for each of the different disasters that we face. Each of them come with different aspects, so they require different planning, different methods. We work with different state and federal agencies as far as monitoring and being prepared for whatever's coming. And we work with different community associations, trying to get them prepared at the individual level, the family level, the community level. The resiliency, part will be, it'll pertain to how resilient the community is, will be how, coincide with the sustainability and mean how fast we can recover from any disaster. So if you're prepared, as the state came out with earlier this hurricane season, for 14 days, food, water, you should be able to withstand most disasters that we have on the island. And the reason that came out 14 days was they did a study that related to, say, the major port, being that everything's got to go through the Honolulu port. 99% of all our goods are coming through that port. 1% comes through air cargo. That if that port is shut down by a major storm or a major event, even a nuclear event, it's going to take 14 days, if you're optimistic, to get that port back up. So building resiliency in our county depends on the individual, the family, the community, everybody, the neighborhoods to get together. Also, we provide emergency communications. That'd be emergency communications within the government through our, redundant systems that we have, relying on the community emergency response teams to get information to us from the communities that are isolated. And then also, the big thing is the public information, the mass messaging that we do. I'll put out a pitch right now for our Blackboard messaging that we do. If you're not signed up on it, you should go to our website, the Civil Defense website, sign up for it. Also urge you to sign up for the police department's NIXL just to stay on top of what's going on the island. And also our focus as far as any emergency is that we direct and coordinate the planning, the response, and the recovery for the island. So all the different partners, private, government, will come to our EOC, and we just kind of facilitate the organization, provide whatever they need to get things done. We'll be the go-between them and the state. The other counties also will support us, and then the state emergency management will be the go-between us and FEMA. Some of the hazards we're dealing with, you guys know, more recently, fight the bite with the dengue, and right now, the state is just about, well, they're coming out with their nuclear information. But everything that we do as far as resiliency and sustainability, we look at each particular hazard and how we can mitigate it. Some of our mass messaging systems, IPAWS and EIS, those are national systems that can be used across the nation. Blackboard is our particular brand that Civil Defense uses, and then the rest are social media. So we try to hit everybody, recognizing that some of this island don't even get radio stations. So, we're trying to rectify that. And then, finally, working with our different partners, different agencies, private and public. Okay, and then I'll be prepared for questions at the end of this session too. Thanks.
Aloha, I'm Diane Lay. I'm the director for the County of Hawaii's Department of Research and Development. We serve a wide range of business interests on the island, and tonight I'll focus on our programs revolving around energy and agriculture, and supporting both recovery and sustainability initiatives. Oops, I didn't switch that over. There you go. So I wanted to just ask, how prepared are we for, greater energy and food independence? And I wanted to ask, what are you doing about electricity and transportation and renewable resources? In the audience, is anybody a farmer? Have you been a farmer? Have you ever grown some of your own food? Have you ever hunted and prepared your dinner from that? Do you intentionally go out and buy local food on a regular basis? And I ask all these questions because I think we are all responsible, the county, our communities, and individuals. We all have a role to play in transforming our island's communities to a more self-sufficient and self-reliant place. As Jay and Talmadge highlighted, as well as Bill, in Hawaii, we're in a particularly vulnerable community, subject to disruptions of service, be they from man-made events or natural events. Our geographic isolation is just a fact of life. So for many of us, whether we're seeking greater harmony with nature, or we're overwhelmed by consumerism, or we've got a heightened sense of pending vulnerability, I think it's caused the county, government as a whole, the county in particular, communities and individuals and individual families to rethink about that balance that we could have if we were acting with intention. So, oops, that slide was supposed to be taken out. Sorry about that. So what are the counties and communities and individual families doing to address sustainability and preparedness in agriculture and energy? So I wanted to start with a quick look at the county's efforts to address vulnerabilities and sustainability around the issue of energy. The county is one of the largest consumers of power. We're also an advocate for businesses and families throughout the island. The county has been engaged in utility planning as well as policy setting, supporting initiatives that lead to keeping costs reasonable for residents and businesses, and also supporting initiatives that lead to energy efficiency and help us to transition off of oil to renewables. And today, with our grid at 54% renewables, our utility is doing a great job as a leader in this island. We also lead by example, the county does. One of our resiliency efforts is this building. It's 100% powered by solar and includes a backup battery. Some of our future steps include hardening of this facility to serve as a future site for the Hawaii emergency operations, as well as public shelters around the island. The Department of Water Supply, it has capacity out at Lalamilo now to, with the 5 windmills there, to provide water in that general area. And also the Department of Water Supply has 8 diesel generators that can be strategically placed at wellheads for emergency purposes. There's a picture of the Lalamilo windmill. So communities and families, they also, again, play a role in emergency preparedness related to energy. I think certain communities around the island, and Jose's going to address some of this, are exploring opportunities to develop renewably sourced microgrids to serve customers that are heavy power users, as well as communities that are geographically isolated. And later on, I'm going to share with you a quick story about one locally owned food distributor whose rooftop is in PV, but they had a real aha moment when a bird flew into the power line and kicked them off, and their food started to get warm. So I'll share that in a little bit. So also, I wanted to mention that individual families are, proceeding to connect to renewables for their home needs and their vehicle transportation options, both to lower costs and generate self-sufficiency and sustainability goals for the individual families. So now I want to talk a little bit about food and agriculture. What an idyllic life farmers lead, right? Oh, yes, it's wonderful. But the fact is that agriculture in Hawaii is much like any other small business, and yet, then again, sometimes it's even more of a challenge because you've got weather variables as well as the high cost of business. And our consumers, we're all a bit pampered. We all expect a whole array of food all the time to be available at our grocer, and we also expect it to be at a low, low price. Yet again, Hawaii is subject to vulnerabilities. That food may not always be there. And in the case of a large natural disaster, say a major hurricane, your neighbor's crops are in the field before that hurricane, but those are not hardened fields. They are not necessarily a resilient place. And the same goes for our production greenhouses. They're not hardened, and those crops will fail. They're vulnerable to wind, rain, and other damaging conditions. And even if a crop is not damaged, as Jay indicated, the roads may not be open. You may not have a trucker that's available to deliver product to the market. The trucks are going to be, Talmadge is going to be making sure that trucks are delivering services to shelters and to communities, and those are going to be essential services, water and food supplies. So, and then for agriculture, if you remember when you were in kindergarten and you started that radish seed, it took 30 days to, before you harvested. Lettuce will take 60 days. Beef cattle will take up to 2 years. So, agriculture is not all the answers in an emergency. So what is the county doing in terms of food and emergency operations? We work closely with to support farming and ranching operations to support their resiliency. We work closely with the state and federal agencies in preparing and responding to disasters. maintaining food distribution networks, and providing education on business resiliency, crop and livestock insurance, and recovery programs. And again, the objective is to restore communities, restore businesses and families' lives. Emergency preparedness, communities and families' roles, as Talmadge said, make sure you've got your supplies. That's essential. And I wanted to just go back to that story about the local food distribution company. When they had the aha moment, that bird flew into the power line, you know, the employee said, wow, you know, our insurance will take care of the spoiled food this time. But what about if we had a major event in the community? Isn't our business responsible? Don't we have a responsibility to make sure that we can recover quickly and provide food? So he's going out and he's exploring options, you know, to supplement the PV. Can they put in batteries or backup generators? That's how communities are stepping up. And again, you know, make sure your family has a supply of stable food supplies. And then I wanted to, my last point was on sustainability. Sustaining our island, it's about our people, our economy, and our environment. Our local food supply, the county is very focused on its commitment to providing, to supporting a robust and diversified agricultural sector, and we do that through policies and investments in our agricultural community. We have limited resources, but we do provide funds for training for both youth and adult in production and business management. We support research and value-added processing and buying local campaigns. We also offer reduced real property tax rates and water rates to incentivize agricultural operations. And we collaborate with our federal and state and industry partners in agriculture. And ultimately, the county wants our producers to be successful, because if a farmer cannot make money, she or he is not going to be farming for long. Yes, that's Richard Ha. And so what about our communities? Our communities, it's essential for our communities to support local producers, because it's all about supporting your neighbors. It's all about supporting those families in your neighborhood and keeping our rural communities alive and well. And individuals, I'd like to say if an individual household spent just $65 a month that they're currently spending on fruits and vegetables, but if they bought local fruits and vegetables, just $65 a month. If we all did that, we could generate up to $28.5 million annually for this local economy. It'd create demand for additional jobs, and it'd put more land into active agricultural production, creating a healthier and more self-sufficient island. So we're not, getting there is not going to be easy. Getting to 100% locally produced products, it won't be easy, but you can do your part and make a difference. Buy local and eat local whenever you can. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jose Dizan, and I'm with Parker Ranch and Pineapple Power. Parker Ranch has been around for 170 years, and we intend to remain a ranch for the next 170 years. My job is to identify alternative uses for ranch lands that are compatible with ranching and that's focusing on energy. That produces benefits to our beneficiary, because Parker Ranch is a trust, and the community that grew around Parker Ranch and all island residents. In addition, we desire to minimize or eliminate the shipping of our cattle, because in the cattle business, we send a lot of our cattle to the mainland and try to keep the cattle back home, again, to encourage sustainability of ranching and of cattle, just to keep them here to maintain sustainability. So in essence, my focus is on that nexus between agriculture, water, and energy. A little bit about Park and Ranch. We have a tremendous amount of renewable resources. We have a lot of great winds up there, probably the best on the island. We have a lot of great solar as well. And we have the topography for pump storage hydro, which is a storage type technology. It's transformational in that you could use wind and solar, for example, to pump water up the hill if there's too much wind or solar. And then in the evening or during a peak or during an emergency, you release that water to create energy. And it minimizes the use of the utilities of Helco's fossil units, for example, to produce energy. So we're looking for those type of projects. There's several in the world. The one I like is the one in El Hierro, which is a Spanish colony in the Canary Islands. They have an upper reservoir that's a little oversized, which helps them with agriculture. And we're looking at something similar to where pump storage could help us with agriculture, because District 9, Waimea area is an agricultural breadbasket for the island. The reservoirs, like I said, could provide for ag energy sustainability, pasture irrigation, drought mitigation, row crop farming, if needed. It provides long-duration storage greater than that of batteries. It provides the type of grid services that the utility needs, and could provide power to an area and allow wind turbines to operate. I put this in because I read that in Puerto Rico, there was a wind turbine that survived the storm, but it couldn't generate. There's a number of reasons why. One, it needs power to turn. Number two, it needs a sync signals from the grid, and neither is there. So you could almost like start up parts of nearby renewable energy with pump storage. Utility would call it black start, but that's too technical. Just say startup. And it's not a chemical battery. We've done studies before looking at microgrid at the regional or larger level, looking at Waimea and North Hawaii. We saw that that was possible. We've also looked at studies that said, well, if we could provide direct benefit to Waimea and North Kahala, can we provide benefit to the entire island? And the answer is yes, and that's where our focus is on right now, is trying to develop a project to benefit all island residents. So we're almost there. We think we got a unique project that's one of a kind. We found a developer. We think that can handle that, and we're just about to make an announcement, just not ready yet. But when we do, you will know. So I'm here to talk about microgrids and a paradigm for microgrids. Microgrid is, a subset of the utility grid, with the ability of that microgrid to come offline and to sustain themselves in the event of an emergency, whether it's on the utility side or if the utility asks perhaps that they go off grid so that there's additional generation that could be used to help others. So a microgrid could be, I guess the simplest one would be a home with solar, rooftop solar and a battery, just kind of self-sustaining as long as that roof stays intact during a hurricane. But it could be a group of homes or businesses that go off grid during a storm. It could be a hospital that supplies its own power from one or multiple sources. It could be a school or a university. It could even be a cluster of neighborhoods or towns, which again we call a regional microgrid or an integrated energy district. An example of integration with a microgrid and the utility, and an example of a series of community microgrids hooked together with the utility, providing the wire services. And you could conceptually do that here, and I'll show you another picture later. But the reason we're here is understanding why a microgrid could be important, and we just have to mention Iniki, Iselle, Sandy, Katrina, Rita, Harvey, Irma, Maria, your name here. I mean, just, there's going to be hurricanes that's going to hit in the world, and there's eventually going to be one that's going to hit us again over here. And that 80% of the Puerto Rico grid was destroyed, and I forgot what Bill said, but I think 50% of the grid is still offline. And at 8 weeks, it's still the longest blackout in American history. Hospitals were affected, critical users were affected, water supplies were low. And we've kind of seen the same thing, here's some of the damage, seen the same thing in Iniki in '92. where about a quarter of the poles were destroyed on the transmission side, 37% on the distribution side, 350 miles of wires, and 20% of the island out for about a month. So I talked about integrated energy districts. I mean, it's, just the way the island is set up. I mean, you could almost put some logical grouping into there on providing power on a daily basis or maybe during an emergency. And you could even cut those swaths smaller, with hospitals being priority, for example. So, a grid modernization effort is necessary. I mean, it's no secret that the electric grids, both on the mainland or over here, are old. And one thing you can do, one concept or paradigm I want to introduce is really focusing on a distributed, independent, and interconnected architecture, almost kind of like the internet in a sense, but a distribution-focused type of grid. And then having support at the legislative level, at the regulation level, to be able to do that. Because right now, it's possible to do with the utility. If you want to be independent, then really you're creating the microgrid has to serve, the way I've described it, multiple houses or multiple businesses, and the way the regulation is set up, you can't do that yet. So it's one type of model is this distribution-centric grid. So today's paradigm is focusing on the response, and Jay and Talmadge discussed that in detail, and I've had the privilege of working with HELCO and Civil Defense on that, and they are very good at that. I'm not even going to discuss this. I mean, they're terrific. But focusing on public health and safety, hospitals, police, fire, water, putting the grid back together to get power to everybody. One way to look at this is, let's focus on the distribution system down at the neighborhood level, at the hospital level. I say lower the cost of the generation portfolio because with solar and wind coming down and battery prices continuing to come down, your average cost of your generation portfolio could come down. So then you can focus on the wires and the poles. As long as you have wires and poles to provide power, you're going to always have a problem, right? Because they're always going to come down. And then change your policies on microgrids to allow microgrids in different forms. So providing incentives for hospitals, for example, or gas stations, or water companies, police and fire to build microgrids or to self-generate during a storm is one thing that could be considered. I put down minimizing the use of poles. I talked to my friend Kevin just before because I couldn't remember the numbers, but back in the day, pole loading or the wind loading on poles were like 55 miles an hour, then 80, and I think they were up to 100-ish miles an hour, and I forgot the number. But why design to that level? Why don't you design it to a Cat 5 wind speed, for example? And undergrounding lines, it's very expensive. I mean, there's no doubt it's expensive. There's been studies that show that, however, that the net present value of underground line versus overhead line is about the same, just that upfront cost is tremendous. The other thing to consider, though, is, being that the Big Island is a young island, you're drilling through lava, and that's also like really, really difficult. The reason I put it down here is if you got a choice, and maybe it applies more to Oahu or Kauai, but if you got a choice of now trying to design your poles to exceed, a Cat 5 wind speed, for example, if that's the wind speed that matters, and looking at that cost and then comparing that cost to undergrounding lines, then it might be a case to where we would be undergrounding more lines. But make no mistake that that is expensive. And I said lowering the cost of generation by diversifying to the clean power options, the non-combustible solar, wind, and then batteries as the price continues to go down, so that your average cost of your overall generation portfolio goes down. Focusing near the communities. And let's see. And this way, if you're focusing at the distribution level with the central station or the primary transmission lines as secondary, near the island, the neighborhoods can come up more quickly, especially like in Puerto Rico. And then eventually what you do is with all these islands, you tie them together. So policies, I think, would be needed to consider a model like this, policy changes that encourage microgrid development, that encourages, again, that independent, distribution-centric, interconnected architecture. And I put, use blockchain technology for transparency in energy transactions. I'm leaving that for another future topic, and maybe Bill could talk about that next. They're doing blockchain in healthcare, provide for transparency. So, yeah, there's been a number of hurricanes, obviously, throughout the world and in the U.S., Puerto Rico. You know, let's use that as a catalyst for our island and the other islands to start thinking about how we could rework or re-engineer our island to be more resilient on the energy side and more sustainable on the agriculture side. To these storms, these superstorms that are coming up. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight, and Bill, thanks for inviting the Kohala Center. My name is Nicole Milne, and I'm the Director of Food and Ag Initiatives at the Kohala Center. We are a nonprofit based in Waimea, a community-based center for research, conservation, and education. And our mission is to respectfully engage the island of Hawaii to be a model of and for the world through our work in the areas of energy self-reliance, food self-reliance, and ecosystem health. So in my position, I oversee the development and implementation of our technical assistance and outreach activities, primarily focused on agricultural education and business development to rural cooperatives and small businesses, farmers and ranchers, and value-added food enterprises statewide. This slide lists the programs at Kohala Center that are focused on agriculture and food self-reliance. And we have approximately 10 full-time positions dedicated to this work. So my background, I'm not an expert in food self-sufficiency or food self-reliance. I came to Hawaii in 2006 to pursue a doctorate at the University of Hawaii at Manoa in geography, and I did a research project on post-plantation agriculture on the Hamakua coast, working with the Hamakua Agricultural Co-op. My background in ag prior to that was doing seed corn trials in Wisconsin, working in aquaculture in Washington State, and then working for several farm and food businesses in Hawaii before joining the Kohala Center in 2012. So Kohala Center doesn't necessarily work in the field of disaster and emergency preparedness. We work with numerous partners, and we're the beneficiaries of many county, state, federal grants and private donations to increase the viability and the vibrancy of the island's local economy, particularly as it relates to agriculture. Our programs focus on educating island youth on the joy of growing food and cooking nutritious, healthy meals. Our programs engage high school students in farming and explores and introduces them to career pathways in agriculture, the culinary field, food manufacturing, and natural resources. Our programs engage farmers in seed saving for both economic and ecological reasons. And our programs work to educate new, beginning, and experienced farmers in co-op development and business, ag business skills. So before you can look at, I think, the island's challenges around self-reliance, I think we need to look at the challenges that Hawaii Island and the state faces in agriculture, in our ag economic landscape. And through my work, the primary challenges that I see are related to economies of scale, which is the small size of Hawaii's farms as compared to farms on the mainland and in other parts of the world, the high costs of inputs and labor that we face in Hawaii, and limited markets. And these all combine to make farming more challenging economically than it is for farmers on the mainland and other international areas. Second, how do we reproduce this industry? How do we reproduce farms and farm workers? Many people do not want to farm. Are there any farmers in the room? Raise your hand. Wonderful. 3. And so where do we find this next generation of farmers? It's really hard work. And how do we find skilled and reliable farm workers to work on the farms that exist? When farmers retire, how do we keep that land in agriculture? And how do we find farmers willing to purchase that business and keep producing food for the local market? And the third challenge is, as individuals, how do we make time to engage, as Diane spoke about, with our local food economy, through gardening, through purchasing local food, through cooking, canning, drying, and fermenting surplus, and through saving seeds. How many people save seed in the room? It's wonderful. So some solutions I've seen to these challenges include working cooperatively through the creation of food hubs and co-ops, investing in cost-saving measures, including the creation of local inputs, shared processing infrastructure, shared equipment and distribution to help give farmers that competitive advantage. In terms of reproducing this industry, is it through land trusts and conservation easements? Is it professionalizing operations by helping farmers master their markets and produce strategically, to borrow from the 2012 County Baseline Self-Sufficiency Report? Is it investing in our current farm laborers so that they have the capacity to manage, and should that farm come up for sale that they're working on, have that capability to purchase that business? Is it through supporting local FFA programs and encouraging high schools to incorporate ag education into their curriculums? And the last one, how do we engage? And I think this is probably the most relevant for everyone in the room. Perhaps it's getting our exercise via gardening. Perhaps it's catching up with friends over a master food preservers class. Visiting the seed lending library in your local community, or volunteering at your child's school garden. But I think the culture in Hawaii really lends itself to this, with its focus on food and family and community. But I think the key to becoming more self-reliant and therefore more prepared is going to be addressing these challenges with a diversity of tools and strategies. So how many people have read the Hawaii County Food Self-Sufficiency Report that came out in 2012? Awesome. It's a wonderful resource. I have a non-color copy right here. It's located on the county's website. Jeff Melrose should really be sitting in this position and speaking. But it's a wonderful resource if you're interested in self-sufficiency on the island. So if we continue to import 80 to 90% of our food, we will not be well prepared for an emergency. Well, we have a lot of agricultural land on the island. Over 50% of it is in export crops, such as coffee, mac nuts, non-edibles like foliage, things that will not sustain us, unfortunately. And if we wait until a disruption in the ports occurs, it'll be too late to plant a garden. You know, as Diane said, sweet potato slips, once they're in the ground, can take 3 to 4 months to harvest the first batch. Bananas, depending on the size of the KKU plant, can take upwards of 9 months or more before you have a bunch that's ready to harvest. So raise your hand if you have seeds stored in your fridge to plant lettuce or eggplant. So we can't wait for the ports to close to plant that seed, so to speak, and to plant a survival garden in our backyards. So I believe what's important for us as an island state that is so dependent on imports, but which has the capacity to grow year-round, is to take advantage of shared infrastructure and support the development of shared infrastructure for post-harvest handling, distribution, and value-added processing. To take advantage of the oversupply of protein, vegetables, fruits, and starches when we have them, and 2, to cut down on the costs of storage, processing, and transportation for individual farmers and processors. Efforts are underway in this area. For example, we see the new ulu co-op on this island preparing frozen ulu and hummus and selling it in local markets. And how do we expand this effort to include sweet potato and taro? It first requires us demanding these foods so that the farmers have an incentive to grow them. So in thinking about this talk, the problem, we have to step back farther, and if the ports are closed and we lose power, these industries really need to be designed so they're compatible with sustainable fuel systems, with pump storage hydro, with wind and solar. In Honokaa, where I live, I went to the propane stores and I asked them how much of a supply do they have to support people that are, using propane to cook, and they said probably a couple days. If word got out that, the refinery on Oahu was down or the ships weren't going to come. And so, having these shelters and schools and communities that can serve to where they can run generators to keep the reefers full and cook meals for the community will concentrate fuel usage and maximize cold storage in communities. And with limited gasoline supplies, these really need to be located within communities themselves because we may not have the ability to travel. The roads may be closed. So we should all purchase bikes. Everyone have a bike? Great, I don't. So next, food storage and distribution of food between communities and to rural isolated populations would be a challenge if the ports were closed and we were short electricity. Supermarkets currently have cold storage and large food distributors have reefer trucks, but perhaps we should considering expanding on these resources, these facilities, so that they can hold more food and transport more food in times of need. I know the county has vehicles, civil defense, as well as the food basket, and the Kohala Center is working with the food basket to increase their capacity to deliver food to isolated rural communities. And again, if gasoline reserves are low, we really need to build the capacity of local communities to produce food for themselves. And this is where I think sustainable agricultural practices come in, specifically those around Pacific Island crops that will need fewer inputs and can generate fertilizer themselves, such as banana, cassava, or pigeon pea, which is known in Indian restaurants as dal. We need to think about our local protein sources and how to generate feed for them. And some animal co-ops are pursuing this on the island. And when we have an oversupply of food, are we capable of fermenting, canning, and drying food, food preservation techniques that don't rely upon cold storage? So I have a quick exercise. So please stand up if you currently have something in your fridge or your cupboard that was made on the island. All right, stay standing if you know the person or the farmer that grew that food or made that product. What'd you say? Stay standing if you know the person who grew that food or made that product. And now stay standing if you grew or made that product. Awesome. So we know who to go to should the ports close. Diane, we're coming over. But I was trying to think creatively and think outside of the box, and I was recently interviewed by someone writing a book that said, the ports were going to close for 6 months, what are we going to do? And it just helps you, okay, I don't have a plan, I don't have a bike. And it made me think of, coming from Minnesota on the mainland where we have tornado drills, perhaps we need to have port disruption drills in the county where we practice our readiness. And perhaps we need to have a course or a series of courses on survival skills on each island that teach people how to build solar ovens, emus, food cellars, plant a food forest or a garden, how to dry, ferment, canned food, and use traditional plants as medicine. The drugstore in Waimea only has a 1 to 2 day supply of diabetes medicines, and they only order antibiotics on demand. And how many people have a 30-day supply of medicine in their cabinet? Most insurance companies won't cover that cost of stocking up. So maybe these courses are sponsored by the county, and maybe we get tax credits for taking these courses. And these people become resources in the community and people to go to should things go south. I wonder about the extent to which we should or can depend upon local governments, the Red Cross, the food basket, to supply us with food when they should really be prioritizing assisting the kapuna, the children, and those that are ill. And those that are able-bodied should be putting shovels to the ground and be planting food in their community. So I want to end on a quote that we turn to at Mala'ai, the Waimea Middle School garden that I worked at often. It's he wa'a he moku he wa'a. The canoe is our island, the island is our canoe. And when you're at sea, the canoe holds everything that you have besides rainwater and fish. It is your island. And I think that as residents of a Pacific island, the most isolated place in the world, this island is our canoe, and we need to live that. We need to really understand that. And so how do we begin to integrate this principle into our lives and respectfully cultivate our communities and our local food system and our local food economy so that we can become more self-reliant and more prepared? Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicole. That was an excellent sum up of today's forum and what we're here about. This next hour is going to all be Q&A, and I see you've brought some questions up. Pete Hoffman is on our board, is also going to be our moderator for the second half. And we also have some web questions that came in on westhawaiiforum.org. And we encourage you to utilize that resource in advance of these forums to get your questions in as well. I got to say that, all of you presented really an excellent scope of the challenges and the opportunities to fix the problems here. And we can do it here in Hawaii because we have the resources from an energy perspective and a food perspective, the two essentials, to basically be self-sufficient or get to a point to where we're a lot more self-sufficient than we are currently. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pete. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you, Bill, and thanks to all the presenters. I think they deserve a round of applause for the effort that they have so far. And one other thing, folks, just to remind you, all the slides and information, some of which may be a little hard to see, I know, sitting in the back from there to here, you can see on the web, and you can zoom that in a little bit better, and I'm sure you'll get the flavor for some of this. There's any number of questions, and we probably could sit here for, I guess, most of the rest of the evening. So sit back, folks, relax a little bit, and we'll start off with a couple of the questions in no particular order. I have a question here, although we spoke frequently about food, agriculture, and energy, but a question, I guess, Talmadge, I would hit you first with as far as civil defense is concerned. How do I prepare for evacuation or escape when hualalai erupts quickly?
Well, we're dealing with that right now with Mauna Loa planning and so forth. It'll be pretty much the same thing, working with USGS, Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. You got to realize where you are on the mountain initially, and back to what I originally said, you got to prepare your 14 days kit, so forth. So depending on where you are on the mountain, where your activities are, where the different flows are likely to go, you got to realize what direction things are possibly coming down. We're going to be working on our messaging with HVO as far as what's happening with Mauna Loa. That'll pertain to Hualalai as well. But in reality, Hualalai right now is pretty quiet. So I don't think that's even should be on your horizon at this point.
I hope the people in Kona agree with you entirely on that point. A couple of other questions then. By the way, folks, we do have questions not only submitted by you here in the audience tonight, but I do want you to know that there's an opportunity, if you can attend one of these forums, to submit questions through our website. And I have a number of those questions that have been printed up, and I'll just indicate that these are from the web when I do indicate that. And here's the first question from our website. How prepared can Hawaii be for emergencies that create supply chain disruptions of essentials like food if we continue to import 99% of our food? Now, I realize that that's been a question that's been addressed by both you, Diane, and you, Nicole. Supposing, Diane, you again perhaps summarize how we can address at least some of that disparity.
Sure. I think that one of the key things is to start with our youth and those that are interested in farming. We need to support their education so that they understand what the production system is. They need to either understand the business or they need to be able to collaborate with other folks that are willing to do the business in. I'm talking about essentially, working cooperatively. By building our farming community back to what it was at one point in time, I think that, we've all moved away from agriculture. Many of us, our parents came from farms, and they told us, don't go into agriculture. And so, because it's a hard life sometimes. But through modern technology, it's becoming easier through sharing of information and and new crops, I think that agriculture has a bright future. So the more that our government and can support agriculture through policies, incentives, as well as the community can create that market demand that Nicole was talking about, farmers will farm.
Just a follow-up question on just that point, Diane. A couple of years ago, University of Hawaii, particularly with the Palamanui facility being constructed, was, if you will, encouraged in any case to develop programs that would not only address farm management for associate degrees and so forth, but also to attempt to include high school curriculum for people who might be interested in that. The county was, at one point, very encouraged or interested in that. Is the county doing anything to follow up on that?
Okay, I was not aware of that. I appreciate you bringing it to my attention. I can visit with the folks at Palamanui. We certainly do support a number of high school programs, as well as intermediate school, the 4-H programs. We support FFA, Future Farmers of America, and some of the adult training programs that Nicole mentioned that the Kohala Center in particular is working on. So.
Nicole, would you like to add a little bit further to that? I know a lot of your effort from the Kohala Center is based on just these particular points about essentials as far as our emergency food supply is concerned.
Yeah, I think that Diane kind of stole on my talking points, but I think that one of the primary things that we can do as individuals is to support our local farmers by prioritizing purchasing local food when you can, because it will help farmers remain viable and encourage new farmers to enter into the profession, because without people here purchasing the food, we don't ship lettuce to the mainland. We need to buy it here, and it needs to be in the grocery stores, not just at the hotels. Consumed by local residents. And I see a lot of promise in adult farmer training and high school ag education programs, even at the elementary and middle school level. When I was working at Mala'ai at Waimea Middle School, to have kids running out to the garden during lunch and saying, "Hey, Auntie, let's make a salad dressing." I didn't know you could make salad dressing until I worked at Mala'ai. It came out of a bottle from the grocery store. And so it was beautiful to see students harvesting local food and putting that into a salad that they were going to have for lunch. And so I think that to start young really helps plant and nurture that seed so that you have an appreciation for agriculture as you get older. But I think that our efforts need to be focused on education and supporting the local farmers that we have.
Thank you, Nicole. Maybe we could look at this, Jay, perhaps a question in your direction. One of the issues in Puerto Rico were the cell towers. People could not communicate with each other between various areas of the island. Will we have the same problems here?
I can't maybe speak for the cellular telephone companies, but I do know when ECEL came through and impacted primarily the Puna area, one of the requests that came up was, could we restore power to cell phones? Because in ECEL, what we learned is customers desire power because they become accustomed to it. In Puna, there's a lot of catchment systems, so they use power to actually run their water systems. So they care for power, but communications is maybe even in front of that or a very close second. People in the community want to know what's happening, so the need for information is very important. So what we learned is if we couldn't get power to an area, we tried to assist with keeping the customers in the community informed. So we actually partnered and opened up community centers where we could have power, and then we inform all the customers in the community. We'd work with Hawaii County Civil Defense and get the message out. And then the community would come to those community centers. We would give them information, status updates on how our power restoration was going. We'd look at where their location, and we'd give them an estimate as to when they might expect power. But they also would plug in and charge their cell phones. We would have Wi-Fi available, and then now they could do their social media. They could let their other loved ones know that they're okay, they're fine. They could share the information that they get from the community center to others. So communications is very important. We're also finding that the old techniques of keeping people informed may not be as effective as they were in the past. In the past, what we would do is we collect information, we send it to the radio stations, and the radio stations would send out public messages. What we're finding is that, customers, they've become accustomed to social media. So they go to social media to try and get as much information as possible. So in these situations, we have a social media group. It's actually centered on Oahu, but what we do is we channel information to them, and then they update our social media, Twitter and Facebook, so that customers can stay informed. We have our own network of communications. I think most people don't realize that mirroring the T&D system, the transmission and distribution system, we have a complex network of communication involving microwave radio, fiber optics. We even use some of the third-party, Hawaiian Telecom's lines. So we have a network of communication so we can stay in touch with our equipment, can control our equipment, but we also can stay in touch with each other. So, day to day, we will rely on cell phones a lot in our normal operations. But when an emergency system like this happens and we lose cell phone connection, we have mobile radios in all of our vehicles. So as far as the company is concerned, we're connected through mobile radios. Hawaii County Civil Defense also sets up a communication system. So when we have someone staffed at Hawaii County Civil Defense, they actually can communicate from our mobile radio station at Hawaii County Civil Defense and send and relay messages to the rest of the company while they get the information right away from Hawaii County Civil Defense. Hope that addresses the
No, thank you, Jay. Appreciate that. And I think it's information like that or a better explanation that we don't see in the newspaper or hear normally, so it's very useful, I think. Talmadge, I think this might fall into your lap, but someone else may look at it. Has the county begun to consider the impacts that sea level rise might have on our infrastructure, particularly that's along our shorelines?
We're not addressing it, to my knowledge, in the county level, but the state has put together, and they just upgraded the status of this group to some kind of a committee, but the governor's tasked a committee to track that effect on the islands.
Diane, please.
Yeah, so if I may, apologize, Talmadge, maybe we haven't updated you. Both Planning Department and the Department of Research and Development are participating in the state's sea level rise or climate change commission, and so that's addressing, starting to look at the complexities that involve sea level rise, because we're not only looking at a lot of government infrastructure and business and residential infrastructure along the coast, but we're also, this changing climate, as the sea changes, it's going to result in additional storms, intensity of storms. So, what does that mean for all of us, in all of our lives? And so complex issues, but we are starting to, take a deeper look at that.
Just out of curiosity, and some people in the audience may also consider this, in that study that they're looking at now, federal money, by the way, supposedly is available for this right at the moment. But has anyone considered the impacts of zoning and how we should look at that in the not too distant future?
I'm sure that will be on the radar.
Thank you, Diane. Jose, I'm a complete supporter myself of microgrids, but I have to ask you the question because you indicated it on one of your slides. How optimistic can we be for state and PUC to adopt some of these microgrid philosophies in the near future?
I think it'll just take some intestinal fortitude.
I'm not quite certain how to interpret that.
It's leadership. It's prioritizing what's important for the island, energy-wise.
Then I would ask, what should the county be doing then? Maybe the question should be rephrased. What should the county be doing to look at adopting a microgrid effort here on the island, particularly because of our distance between different communities and so forth?
Yeah, and so I think consistent with what Diane and Nicole have been saying, if you're looking at food sustainability, food storage, it's incentivizing maybe the grocery stores or the hospitals or the gas stations to be open, starting small, so that we will have that capability to go places and to have places where we can get our food, or the hospitals will be able to help the communities. And you could start like that for the county, or the state.
Here's a specific question, maybe to expand that a little bit further, because several of these are on microgrids, and I thank the audience for the questions that here. I hope we can get to all of them. It looks like Panayola Power would use the same infrastructure as the utility, poles, lines, renewables. How would that be more resilient?
So the concept that I'm describing, focusing on the distribution system, you're going to have to start with reinforcing the poles and wires. I mean, trees will fall on the wires. And like I said before, as long as there's wires and poles, there's always going to be a challenge. So reinforcing at the distribution level and moving out is really the way to do it. Again, if we want to focus on a distribution-centric, resilient grid, I think any generation, whether at the utility scale or at the distribution scale, is going to have a challenge because of the wires. So I think focusing on tree management, vegetation management, deeper or more comprehensive than we've done before, for example, is a way to do that. And of course, there's scale. I mean, right now we're looking at a project that provides benefit to all island residents in terms of dropping electricity prices. But if the focus is going to be on, okay, let's work on focus on grid resiliency and changing the philosophy of how we plan our grids, and that's where the intestinal fortitude piece comes in. And then we change, how everybody, not just Panayola Power, but how everybody does their business on the energy side.
Are there some incentives that could be used to encourage people to do this? Could the county devise some system of incentives to broaden that effort?
I'm looking at Diane.
It's just from your perspective, Jose.
I mean, I think there are ways, because you look historically in the storms, even in Puerto Rico, people are going to need services. And so if there's a way that we can, there may be motivational incentive for the grocery stores or the gas station to stay open, because they'll make money maybe, but it's hard to designate one store or one hospital, but there are public and private hospitals. Maybe the state and the county can work on the public hospitals, and then providing some incentive so that the private hospitals can stay up as well. Same with the water companies.
Thank you. Did you want to add to that, Diane?
Sure, I'd be happy to add a little bit. Actually, the federal government, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, has a number of programs that serve rural communities in moving towards renewables, and so there may be points there where they're grants or they're low-interest loans. So.
Thank you. Here's another question submitted by the web or through our web. What infrastructure elements are needed to support storage and distribution of locally produced essential food stocks? What infrastructure elements are needed to support storage and distribution of food? Nicole, you want to take a shot at that? You
Yeah.
mentioned some of this in your presentation.
Yeah, I think that infrastructure elements, I think of existing cold storage facilities, like the one in Lalamilo, the Kamuela Vacuum Cooling Co-op. I think facilities like this that already exist, we need to make sure are kind of up to scruff. We need to make sure that they have, that they're food safety certified and that they meet those standards. We need to make sure that the roofing is solid. We need to make sure that they are linking in and pursuing sustainable energy. I think the Kamuela Vacuum Cooling Co-op's electric bill is, upwards of $4,000 a month. And so how can we begin to get them solar panels or wind turbines to be able to cut that cost and therefore encourage other local farmers to tap into that co-op? I think that's going to be important. In terms of distribution, reefer trucks are really expensive investments for most farmers and food businesses. And I think that some local businesses have worked, including the food basket, to have, I'm spacing the word, but when they're taking food out into the communities, they have a CSA program right now for people with SNAP and other customers. And so when they're taking food out into the communities, they can backhaul for farmers to the markets, in Hilo or Kona. And so I think, working cooperatively to help share some of these costs of distribution will be important, which involves networking. And at Kohala Center, we do a little bit of that where we bring people into the room to talk about the resources that they do have and how they can share with people in need. So.
Thank you, Nicole. Diane, a question. We all want to support local produce, but 91% of the rat lung worm cases are on this island. How much money is the county putting to find out how it is transmitted, how to wash lettuce and other produce properly, and how to protect catchment tanks?
Okay, invasive species and health care is primarily the responsibility of federal and state government. That said, the county's not ignoring the issue. It's of serious concern, and so the county council is, some of the members are stepping up and putting forward some of their council contingency funds to support additional research in both assessing the how the transmission occurs, as well as options for washing produce. Right now, I think the county has been supportive of the efforts of the State Department of Agriculture in, just reinforcing with folks that no matter where your produce comes from, whether produce and fruits and vegetables, no matter where it comes from, whether it's locally produced from Oahu or from the mainland or from another country, you need to wash it well. Wash it once, turn it over, take a look, wash it again, turn it over, take a look, and wash it one more time. Okay?
Thank you. Jose, can a large condo be a microgrid or maybe a nanogrid, according to what you had on your chart?
Absolutely, and there are companies that are actually doing that and participating in the Utilities Demand Response Program on Oahu, for example, where the building could be taken off grid during an emergency. So certainly that technology is available now.
Is there an example in this county?
Not that I'm aware. There could be, but
Okay.
I'm not aware.
A couple other questions. I'm not sure exactly where it should be directed. What went wrong on Puerto Rico, and how can we avoid a repetition of what happened there regarding emergency response? Talmadge, you first.
Well, some things that went wrong was preparation, basically. They ran out of food and water within 30 hours. And so, basically talks to what we've been discussing here as far as warehousing locally produced food products and so forth. Very important what they're finding out in Puerto Rico. Also, things got jammed up at the harbors. Distribution was a big thing as well. And I heard there's issues getting people or responders in and out of that area. So numerous problems with the response and what went on there. I think preparation was a big thing as well. So falling back on what state emergency management is saying, 14 days could be critical with these folks.
Using the Puerto Rico example maybe for our benefit, can we be assured that the county is looking at ways to avoid the same type of things that happen there?
We're looking at it along with state, so it's hard lessons for those folks. Hopefully, we won't repeat them up here, but definitely preparation, resiliency from the individual person through the families. That's what's going to get us through any kind of disaster.
Thank you. Jay, does HELCO do NIMS drills? And you might want to explain that, because I'm not quite certain I understand that entirely myself. Give me the acronym, please.
Okay, NIMS is National Incident Management System, and the question is, do we do drills? Yes, we do. I showed a slide that showed the organization. It's different from your everyday organization. National Incident Management System was set up so it's a standard way of organizing across the country, so that you have different sections. You may have your operations sections. So that operations section will be the section that is actually out in the field and doing the work. So in our case, if we had to restore power, that would be all of our linemen and the supervisors directing the linemen. Behind the people that are actually doing all of that work, there's a whole large workforce supporting that operational group. So in the NIM system, you'll have a planning section. So as the operations group is doing the work at the current moment, you need a whole planning section figuring out what they're going to do for the next period. You don't want the operating people being distracted, so we create a whole planning section for the next period so that they have all of the materials, they're directed, knowing where to go. So that's a planning section. Then you have what we call a logistics section, right? Line workers need to eat. If we bring in crews from another island, or if we bring them in from the mainland, they have to have a place to stay. We don't want anybody getting distracted doing that. You don't want a supervisor figuring out where their linemen are going to sleep or where their next meal is going to come from. So we create a whole separate section, a logistics section to take care of all the logistics, the transportation, the food, the lodging. And then you have other areas keeping the government informed, keeping our customers informed. So we have all different parts of the organization. We stand that up. And the beauty of having the National Incident Management System is you can grow your workforce. So if we don't have enough planning people, right? Our planning people has worked 48 hours straight. We can fly in people from Honolulu who's been trained in the system. They know what it is. We do a handoff, and they can just continue the effort going forward. That's the beauty of the National Incident Management System. We drill every year because that part of another permit is nothing to do with hurricane response, but with respect to the use of fossil fuels, oil, liquid fuel, there's a possibility of spills. So there's a requirement in our permit that we are able to respond if there's a spill, and there's a requirement in our permit that we drill every year in the National Incident Management System. So we use that as our driver to drill every year. So we drill every year on the National Incident Management System to drill a simulated oil spill. So we stand up the whole organization, we bring in consultants, we simulate an oil spill drill, and what we're doing is drilling the use of that system. It comes really in handy because when we have an approaching storm, we stand up, the organization is very similar, and instead of drilling now, we're actually responding in a real situation. So we have a lot of experience. We're not perfect. I wouldn't call ourselves expert in the NIM system, but we do have a lot of experience. We believe in it, and we use it. Now that I got the mic, I want to talk a little bit about microgrids. The first question that brought up on microgrids was, where's the PUC on this? And the PUC is actually supportive, and they want us to do more investigation, actually maybe deployment of microgrids. So there's that desire by the Public Utilities Commission. Microgrids are not something new. Microgrids have been here for a long time. In fact, this island was a series of microgrids. If you go back and you look at how our grid developed, they actually were centered around the sugar plantations. So each sugar plantation actually was a microgrid. So they'd have the sugar plantation, and the sugar plantation would usually have a mill, and they'd use electricity to generate electricity to process the sugar cane, but then the excess electricity, they would create a microgrid, right? And part of the plantation philosophy was to house the labor, so you'd have a plantation camp next to the plantation, and you'd have a little microgrid. Well, over the years, all of these microgrids, it made sense to connect them all up. And on this island, you actually had two separate systems. You had the Kona system, and you had the Hilo system, and over time, we connected the two, and we have just one grid over time. There are many instances where it does make sense to have a microgrid. We're looking at North Kohala because North Kohala has just one transmission tie. And if we lose that transmission tie, North Kohala doesn't have any power. We have wind farms up there, but it's not designed to actually operate as a microgrid. So we're looking at what technologies we can deploy in North Kohala so that if we lose a transmission line, they may be able to operate independently, not connected to the rest of the grid. If we had a large, disruption, maybe like Puerto Rico, we have the option of operating our independent power plants as microgrids. So what we would do is we'd do an assessment. We'd send our engineers, do an assessment, and see if it makes sense. Should we try to rebuild the system and then bring it all up at once, or should we restore in pockets? So we might do around Keohole, because we have a power plant here in Keohole. Say if it survived, but the transmission to tie it to the rest, it is not operable, we may just run Keohole on an island. We don't like to operate that way normally because it's not as stable as when the grid is all interconnected, because there is strength in being all connected and working as one. So it's not new. Some of the experimental things that's going on is NELHA, Natural Energy Laboratory. They want to investigate microgrids, so they're partnering with Hawaii Natural Energy Institute to see if it makes sense to do a microgrid at NELHA. We're also partnering with Hawaii Natural Energy Institute on the North Kohala one. We are considering hiring them in order to do a study for us for North Kohala. So microgrids are not new, and it's a technology that we would implement. There was a little earlier conversation about lava flow. So when the lava flow was approaching Pahoa Town, it was actually threatening two of our transmission lines that tie in that Puna community. And if the lava flow had damaged two of the transmission lines, that whole community would have been isolated. So one of our strategies was to create a microgrid in Puna. So we actually deployed two small generators, and we actually put it out in Puna, and we had it prepped so that if the lava flow did proceed and did damage our transmission line, we would have created a microgrid in Puna and actually operated Puna independent from the rest of the system. So, it's not like the utility is ignorant or inexperienced with microgrids. We understand it very well. It's not something new to the utility, and it would be used where it makes sense. I think the smallest microgrid is a standby generator, right? You have a hospital, and then you have a standby generator. And then if there's a problem with the utility service, they start up the generator and they continue to operate the hospital. I can tell you a story. Kapilan Hospital in Honolulu had a problem with their transformer. And for a week, they actually ran on a standby generator because the interconnection to the utility, there was a problem. It wasn't the utility's transformer, it's actually the hospital's. In order to fix that problem, we actually shipped a transformer from here to go assist the Kapiolani Hospital, got it in place. The Oahu crews actually installed the transformer that we had here, and then we got the hospital back on. But that's a case where it is a very good thing that they had that standby generator. I told you part of our preparations as a storm comes, right? We do all of our checklists. One of our checklists is to make sure that all of our standby generators are operating. We're the utility, but even the utility, we have standby generators for all of our major facilities. So part of the checklist is actually making sure all of the fuel for our standby generators are topped off. All of our substations, our communication systems, they all have backup batteries. So we as a utility, even if we supply the power, we back up our facilities with a set of storage. You know, it takes almost a year for part of our crews to go around and make sure all of these battery systems are working. You know, they do a maintenance program. We have a continual capital replacement for all of these storage systems. So microgrids, battery storage, all of that is not new to the utilities. It's not something foreign. We've have a lot of experience in that area.
Thank you, Jay. I guess I can kill these two questions then. Are you working on the concept of microgrids? Is HELCO looking into microgrids?
Oh, okay. I was one step ahead.
All right.
Then.
We'll put those aside with the idea that, yes, you are, and where it's applicable, at least HELCO is willing to proceed with
Yes.
these as part of the county's response
Yeah.
in the event of an emergency.
Yes.
Diane, a question for you, please. You mentioned, in fact, one of the a very good presentation, I might add, just from my perspective, of what the county should be doing in sustainability and so forth. I thought that was as concise as I've heard it in my 8 years that I had on the council, so please forgive me. Part of the effort, though, I think one of the resources that wasn't mentioned here, and that I know was available to the county some time ago, a couple of years ago, was the Agriculture and Energy Commissions that were formed at one time to assist the Director of Research and Development in providing just these types of answers from the community on sustainability. I mean, we went through, as you well know, a long drill on this, and those were supposed to be resources that could be used by you now in your position to do this. What's the status of those commissions?
Okay, so there's an advisory commission on energy and a separate one on agriculture for to the mayor. And what we found when we came into the county government was both of those commissions had been meeting continuously and had created, they had taken the county's energy plan and the county's agriculture plan and had drilled down extensively into specific action steps. I believe that the agriculture checklist has got about 13 pages of tasks to do that involve both the county as well as state and other stakeholders. So we chose as my prerogative, I recommended that we not reseat those commissions at this point in time, but we start working on the task lists that were provided. And so that's one of the things we're doing. And then we're trying to go out and engage with the different stakeholders, be they energy stakeholders or agricultural stakeholders, you know, to proceed with the action steps. So that's been our strategy. I'll just elaborate a little bit more because Pete's kind of frowning at me, maybe. I'm not sure. But, you know, one of the things that concerns us about advisory commissions and boards is it does take staff time away because we have, you know, there are requirements for posting agendas, creating minutes. And so, again, these were very detailed task lists that these commissions came forward with. And we have limited staff, so we're working on that. We're also pursuing not only initiating initiatives ourselves, but we dedicate a good portion of the Department of Research and Development's budget to contracting with different entities, be they the state, like the College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources, or nonprofit groups to assist us with these tasks. So we are engaging on them.
Thank you, Diane. Another question submitted from the web, again about our supply chain and food. How do we ensure island residents don't go hungry in the event of a supply chain disruption that could run into weeks? I think we've addressed some of that. Don't assume airlift capacity could bridge the food gap, especially if the disruption went beyond Hawaii. Somebody want to summarize maybe some point of that in order to address this particular question? It seems like it's the same thing we've talked about before. But again, how do we ensure we don't go hungry? Talmadge, haven't heard from you in a couple minutes.
Well, one thing I wanted to point out after the Puerto Rico question was, folks that wait to the last minute to go to the store and get your supplies, what's actually happening is you're depleting the stores of what they have on stock. So, in fact, leaving us with nothing. So if you get your supplies early, you get your 14 days early, and you're not depleting what's in the stores, that'll remain for distribution, if we need it at that point. So, strategies like that will help.
And this includes the run on toilet paper. Any one of you who were here in the 70s when we went through that, I think that's a good response and something I think that we need to remind ourselves of. I don't think we do that often enough. Several other questions. Question, Diane. Currently, Department of Water Supply is not up to capacity with water in West Hawaii. What a surprise. What is the county doing, or DWS doing, to assume it will be available in an emergency?
Okay.
And I'm sorry,
Okay.
let me add one, there's a little bit further on this. What can we do as individuals to ensure that this is happening?
Okay. Okay, I cannot speak for Department of Water Supply in terms of the current situation and the situation that has occurred. So I know currently the Department of Water Supply is asking those in the impacted area to continue to conserve water, and so that is one thing that everybody can do. In terms of when I referred in my presentation to some of their work that they're doing in terms of backup and resiliency, I think that is similar to what the utility does. They know they have a primary mission to provide service. And so they also have a primary, whether it's in normal operating conditions or emergency situations. And so these steps that were taken before to, establish backup generators were done before the current well situation. So, they also can be, these are generators that are mobile. They can move them to other well locations. And I'm going to defer all other questions about Department of Water Supply to the department, so.
It was a question that was here, Diane, I'm
It's okay.
sorry.
It's all right.
Nicole, are you saying that food sustainability during a hurricane, or food stability during a hurricane season, we should all be planting a garden? I'm not quite certain what that might have referred to in your presentation, but a response?
Well, I think that when I was designing my presentation, I was thinking, all right, what happens if our seaports and our airports were cut off for upwards of 3 months or 2 months? If anyone was here for the 2006 earthquake, that there's police at the grocery store, making sure that there isn't a rush into the grocery store to purchase food and into Ace Hardware to purchase batteries. And so, I think that it's important to, as everybody said, to have that 14 or 21 or even a month, in some cases, supply of food on hand, and it not be food that you necessarily need to cook. A can of beans is good, but not super tasty. To think about nuts and peanut butters and boxed milk, things that will get you by, and you don't need to dig an emu in order to cook it, or fire up your grill if you don't have propane. And I don't think everyone should run out and plant a garden, but I think you should know where the gardens are in your community. And I think that if you have the ability to plant a garden, you should. Because I think that it is an important backup in the extreme times. Because even a clump of banana a stand of banana trees will provide so much food for you in times of need. And what many countries in Africa rely on during times of famine, are bananas and cassava and some of those Pacific Island crops. So I don't think everyone needs to go plant a garden, but I think that it behooves you to have more than 14 days of food on hand.
I have a question here, of course, about the Jones Act, and I'm not certain that this is applicable to a disaster or an emergency in which I think the Jones Act is suspended, but I'll ask the question anyway. The 97-year-old Jones Act has a major impact on Hawaii's shipping. It seems to be time to rethink this act. Do you know whether rational minds are getting together to re-examine this act and provide relief to the islands? Anyone?
I do not know.
Just my full knowledge of the Jones Act is a little weak, maybe. But in time of emergency or disaster, the Jones Act provisions, I believe, are suspended. And the federal government would do that in time of an emergency. I think that's the case. So it may not be applicable to what we're talking about in times of disaster at the moment. The other question, what we should do with the Jones Act, is not a topic for this forum. Jose, could you please define for us blockchain technology? And I don't know whether anybody else is confused a little bit, but you mentioned that in your presentation as being part of perhaps another forum. I'd be interested in what blockchain technology is in this case.
Wow, okay, it's a technology that sits behind Bitcoin, Ethereum, and all the other digital currencies. I don't know a simple way to explain it, but you have different layers as you do transactions, and based on time intervals. And as those intervals continue, they get stacked. You get to a point where you're at 6 levels or 6 chains, and you can't manipulate it. You can't, just like in accounting, you could change the books. You can't do that. And it's transparent, so everybody sees it and everybody's policing it. So it's a way to conduct transactions that is decentralized and that is totally transparent. You can make an argument that banks, they're closed systems, centralized systems, and you can't see what's going on inside. You're trusting that you go to the ATM, you get $1, that dollar is worth something, and you put that dollar somewhere else. With the blockchain transaction, there is value, and because there's always a reciprocal side of the trade or the exchange, and like I said, it's transparent and decentralized. Healthcare is looking into that. There's a number of other areas that are looking into that as well. And people don't understand it, and so there's fear. It's a matter of getting understanding. There's a number of good books and other good pieces that discuss it, and it's been around for a while, and it's getting more popular. That is a subject for another forum.
See what happens when you put it on the slide here in the presentation?
Won't do that again.
Jay, you perhaps answered this before in a different context. Is Hawaii County planning on converting its police, fire, civil defense, water department to microgrids? And does the county, or might the county, consider this the best way to protect those facilities?
I think I mentioned the smallest and simplest microgrid would be a single facility with standby backup generation. The county employs that in many of its facilities to be ready for emergencies. I'm not sure where this question is going, but I think I've spoke more on behalf of the county than I should have, so I can turn it over to Talmadge if you want to say any more.
In fact, all the fire departments, all the stations, the main police department, civil defense, we've all got backup generators. So, if the grid fails, we're powered up.
Thank you. Diane, in Jeff Melrose's study a number of years ago, 2012, I think, on the capability that this island has for agriculture, I know there were a couple of charts or studies in there that talked about the amount of arable land in production. Mm-hmm. What was the percentage that we have on this island of arable land that's there? And Nicole, if you've got the information, please.
I tagged it because I knew someone was going to ask this question. I'm just going to read this short paragraph. Hawaii Island contains roughly 2,580,000 acres, of which 1,185,000 acres are designated as agricultural by the state land use system. Of these agricultural acres, just 4% is in active crop production, 2% is in commercial forestry, and 40% is in pasture. The remaining 54% of state-designated ag land is unused.
I mention that only because I don't know the figures, but I think we have a great potential here that we're not using in this county. And Melrose's study, I think, highlighted that and should emphasize that for the county and anyone interested in how we can adjust or at least sustain ourselves in the future. Another question. How capable is the emergency power for our airports and hospitals? Want to take a shot at that, Talmadge?
The hospitals, same as the county facilities, they all have backup generators. And the airports have the same. So, we as long as the generators are serviceable and we all have our service, our maintenance schedules and so forth, they get checked monthly. And, we know it's critical infrastructure, so pretty sure that if the grid fails, the generators will kick in.
I guess there's another type of question that came in here at the end. With backup generators topped off, how much fuel does HELCO have on an island to keep the grid going? Maybe an amount of days or?
So when Talmadge was answering the standby generator question, I was trying to figure out what our standby generator capability is, and I've forgotten offhand. Maybe Mr. Walgen might be able to help me out there. But as far as the power plants, we have on island, on average, I think that the number is 21 days worth of fuel. So, if there was a problem, there was a stoppage of the fuel supply, on average 21 days. It gives us backup, it gives us capability, but it's, I wish we had 60 days, it would make me feel a lot more comfortable, but it's logistics and there's cost, right, of holding that much fuel and not using it. I think if we did get into a situation where we're worried about the fuel supply and being able to, sustain it on a long-term basis, that's the kind of conversations we would work with the county, Hawaii County Civil Defense, and inform them right away that, we don't have the barges coming in. This is the usage per day. What do we do? Should we start now putting out messages to conserve? We may have to do only essential loads. But that's how we work with the Hawaii County Civil Defense. It then becomes a collective community decision. It's not just a utility decision. And I can speak highly of Hawaii County Civil Defense. I mean, they're the central, they're the core. When we had the ESAL emergency, we have friends, we have ties. I invited my friend from KIUC, Kauai, since he had actually lived through Iniki, and he had, experience of a very difficult situation. I invited him to come over and observe how we operate. He came over, and what he observed and what he complimented us on was our relationship with Hawaii County Civil Defense. He says he's never seen the way they organize everyone. All the partners come in, everyone's, has a place to sit. One of the questions was, what does DWS do? Well, Department of Water Supply. Well, they will tell us. They will say, we're worried about this pump. Can you go over there and restore service first? Those are the conversations that we have at Hawaii County Civil Defense. Our friend from KIUC said he's that is one of our strengths in responding in the emergency like that. It's the way we operate and the way we come together and work together rather than fight and start pointing fingers. And the county has done a really good job of creating that culture. That's the first thing. They give us a call. They say they're going to stand up the Emergency Operations Center. We don't even question it. We just send our representative there. And if they have to sleep there, they'll sleep there. We do shifts because that's the hub. That's where we get their information. That's where we share. That's where we get a collective, unified direction so that we can serve the community.
Thank you, Jay. Jose, you want to add something there?
Yeah, so instead of trying to go for a 60-day or higher fuel storage, it's more, to me, wind, PV, and storage, especially if there's going to be a port disruption, so whether it's pump storage, hydro, and wind, and PV or batteries. It doesn't have to be a combustible resource like fossil fuels.
Good point, thank you. This is going to be the last question, and it addresses our handling of cargo ships at the port in Hilo. Can the port in Hilo handle cargo ships? Well, we know they can. What is the limitation that we have on our port facilities at the current time?
Well, what happens is that all the cargoes has to come through Honolulu because it's the only deep water harbor in the state. They're the only ones with the sizable cranes that can remove the containers off those ships, put them onto the barges, the smaller ships that bring them to the outer islands. So that's the limitation that we have.
I think it needs to be remembered, it's not only pier space. The large ships can come into Hilo, but if you don't have the cranes, the capability to offload those ships, it doesn't matter what your facility looks like on the ground or how big a ship can be in port. And I think many people would not know that unless they were addressing the issue like you have. I'm going to turn it over to Bill at the moment. Thank you very much. I'm sorry if there were some questions here we didn't get to. Many interesting questions still could be asked. Thank you very much for the presenters who put up with me.
Thank you, Pete, and thank all of you for coming this evening. I just wanted to give you in the closing remarks tonight that this is our final forum for 2017, and that February 2018 will kick off the 2018 forum season, and we very much look forward to seeing you back. I wanted to also remind you that the westhawaiiforum.org website is a tremendous free resource for all of you. It's a community resource library that provides basically not only these individual forums that we provide, but also all of the presenter information that you see tonight here and from previous forums are online, available along with additional information. So by example, to my friend Jay and Jose regarding energy, in June we had Beyond Oil, Hawaii's Clean Energy Promise. And associated with that, in November 2016, we had the Hawaii's Climate Change Challenge, which also dealt with energy. September 2016, Hawaii's Clean Energy Future. There's a theme here. September 2015 from 16, a year previous, we had Energy Independence Hawaii Style. And finally, June of 2015, all about electricity. We've been talking about this an awful lot, but it seems to me like we ought to start to take some meaningful action in migrating ourselves beyond the old 20th century model to the 21st century model in terms of energy. If you think about the internet, think about a spider web. The spider web, basically, if it loses one piece of it, still stays intact. New grids, that is the grid thinking going forward in the 21st century, is basically an interconnected microgrids, if you will, that can stand alone but also interconnect and share energy and are managed through the sophistication of today's computerized technologies. So I wanted to thank you all and to thank also the Boy Scouts, Troop 79, and also McDonald's and Kona, who have been great supporters of our forum. And more specifically, we are an all-volunteer organization. We basically operate without a budget except what we can do in terms of fundraising. The county has been a great supporter of us. And to that, and they're not here tonight, but as a matter of record, council persons Karen, Miley, and Drew from the west side here have been very helpful in helping us obtain contingency funding to continue our work here for the county and for the community. And so in that, I wanted to again thank you all for coming this evening, and we look forward to seeing you in February. And to our presenters, thank you. This is the representation of the kind of quality of speakers that we have here at West Hawai'i Forum. And we put these monthly forums on to provide as much civic involvement and education on issues that are important to you, the community. We are one island, we are one community.